Millionaire receives a mother's message asking for help for her baby by mistake and discovers love. Imagine checking your phone past midnight and finding a desperate text from a stranger. It wasn't meant for you, but it carried the heartbreaking cry of a mother begging for a few dollars to buy formula for her hungry baby. Would you dismiss it as a wrong number? Or let your heart answer, realizing that sometimes destiny arrives in the most unexpected ways? This is the story of Daniel Walker, a gifted architect and the owner of a successful construction firm in New York. Behind the glittering lights of New York City, Daniel Walker lived two very different lives. One was the public life, where he was known as a talented architect, the owner of a major construction firm, often featured in architecture magazines, attending glamorous events and high-stakes meetings. But there was another life, quieter and hidden, known only to a handful of people close to him. The life of a man who spent his time and fortune quietly planting seeds of hope for those struggling to survive each day. Daniel's luxurious Manhattan apartment was a symbol of his success, with high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and sleek European furniture. On his shelves sat prestigious awards celebrating his architectural brilliance, multi-million-dollar contracts for malls, hotels, and skyscrapers. Yet that same apartment was also the clearest reminder of his solitude. Each night when he returned home, the only companions were the whistling wind against the glass and the silent glow of city lights reflecting off the walls. Since his mother's passing, the emptiness had only grown. She had raised him alone after his father walked out, teaching him that true worth was never measured by the balance in a bank account, but by how one used it to make the world a better place. And so, even while buried under blueprints and deadlines, Daniel often found himself driving to the poorer streets of Brooklyn and the Bronx, places that stood in stark contrast to the luxury of his world. He had once quietly slipped an envelope of cash under the door of an elderly woman with diabetes so she could afford her medication. Another time, he paid for the entire surgery of an employee's child without ever mentioning it. On certain nights, he would walk into a small grocery store, buy out the shelves, and ask the shopkeeper to distribute the food to families in need. Daniel never spoke of these acts. There were no photos on social media, no articles in the press. To him, kindness was never meant for display. Despite being admired by many, Daniel always felt something within him was missing. Each night, after returning to his silent apartment, he would brew a cup of coffee, sit by the window overlooking the restless Manhattan traffic, and ask himself, if Mom were still alive, would she be proud of the man I've become? Or would she see me as just another wealthy, empty soul? That question clung to him like a shadow. Even at glamorous parties, as glasses clinked and laughter filled the room, Daniel often felt detached. The conversations, the smiles, the small talk, all of it seemed like a social performance he was obligated to attend. Deep down, he longed for something real, something that could finally fill the void left since his mother's passing. While Daniel Walker lived surrounded by wealth yet burdened by loneliness on the other side of New York City, a young woman was fighting through a very different reality. Emily Johnson, 25 years old, shared a tiny rented room in Queens with her 6-month-old son. There were no wide windows overlooking the skyline, no sleek furniture, just 4 damp walls, an old bed, and a wooden crib a neighbor had passed down to her. Life had never been easy for Emily. She worked full-time as a cashier at a local supermarket, her wages barely covering rent and some cheap groceries. After the baby's father walked away the moment he learned she was pregnant, Emily became a single mother, carrying responsibilities she had never prepared for. But no matter how hard things became, Emily refused to break. Each morning she rose before dawn, cradling little Ethan in her arms before leaving him with a neighborhood babysitter. On her way to the supermarket, she whispered a prayer for strength to endure another long day on her feet, forcing polite smiles at impatient customers, all while knowing that her meager paycheck would never be enough. Ethan was her only reason to keep going. His bright eyes and innocent smile reminded her that life still held meaning. Yet lately, something had been troubling her. Ethan cried more often, and his weight was not improving. At the community clinic, the doctor gently advised that he needed a special formula, richer in nutrients. Emily knew it was necessary, but when she saw the price, her heart sank. It was nearly a third of her weekly income. For many nights, Emily sat at her rickety table with a worn notebook, listing every expense. She crossed things out, recalculated, but nothing balanced. Rent, electricity, medicine, and now formula she could not possibly afford. Helpless tears streamed down as Ethan cried from hunger, the cheap formula never enough to keep him satisfied. Pride was something Emily always held close. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, once told her, "Being poor isn't shameful, as long as you earn your living honestly." Emily never forgot those words. She despised the idea of begging for help, afraid of being seen as a burden. But motherhood had changed everything. When she saw Ethan curling in hunger, she realized her pride meant nothing compared to her baby's well-being. In a moment of despair, Emily remembered a scrap of paper a co-worker had given her weeks earlier, a phone number of a woman said to help struggling single mothers. At first, Emily dismissed it, determined never to use it. But that night, with Ethan's cries echoing in the darkness and only a few drops of thin formula left in the fridge, she picked up her phone with trembling hands. Sitting in the dimly lit room, the glow of the screen lit up her tear-streaked face as she typed. She rewrote the message again and again, fighting to sound calm though her shaking fingers betrayed her. Finally, with tears on her cheeks and her heart racing, she pressed send. What Emily didn't realize was that in her nervous haste, she had pressed the wrong key. The message, instead of reaching the woman she had been told about, traveled invisibly through the city's networks and landed in the phone of a complete stranger, a man sitting alone in his luxurious Manhattan apartment. A small mistake, but one that would become the greatest turning point of her life. Daniel's phone buzzed just past midnight. He was about to switch it off for the night when a new message appeared. At first, he thought it was another advertisement or a routine bank alert. But as he opened it, the words froze him in place. "I'm sorry to bother you. I don't have money to buy formula for my 6-month-old son. Please help me. Just $15 so my baby doesn't go hungry tonight." The message was short, clumsy, filled with typos. Yet that very clumsiness revealed its raw truth. A desperate mother doing whatever she could to save her child. Daniel read it 3 times, his heart pounding harder with each glance, as if every word carved deeper into his chest. This wasn't the usual scam. He could feel the weight of real pain behind those broken lines. Daniel rose from his chair and walked to the tall window overlooking New York's sleepless skyline. Thousands of lives were unfolding below, but somewhere in that vast city, a woman was pleading for help in the dark. He remembered his mother's stories, how she had sacrificed everything to raise him alone, how she went without so he could eat. A mother will do anything to see her child happy. Her words echoed in his mind, and he knew he couldn't ignore this. That very night, Daniel reached out to a friend in telecommunications, asking him to trace the number. Within minutes, the answer came. The text originated from a struggling neighborhood in Queens. Not a polished scam, but a place Daniel knew well, where families fought each day just to survive. Back at his desk, Daniel stared at the glowing phone screen, sensing fate at work. Out of millions in this city, why had the message landed in his hands? Perhaps because he was meant to be the one to respond. He couldn't wait until morning. Grabbing his jacket, he chose the old pickup he usually drove to construction sites, leaving his luxury car behind. On the way, he stopped at a 24-hour pharmacy. The cashier raised an eyebrow as Daniel stacked cans of formula, diapers, wipes, and basic baby medicine on the counter. Daniel simply smiled, paid, and hurried out. The October night was crisp, the streets to Queens unusually quiet. Throughout the drive, Daniel kept replaying the message in his head, picturing the eyes of a baby he had never met, but whose cries he could almost hear within his own chest. He reminded himself he wasn't going there to hand out charity, but to deliver a chance for a baby to be fed and for a mother to breathe easier. At nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, Daniel pulled into a narrow street lined with aging apartment buildings. His hand tightened around the bags as his heart raced. He didn't know how the woman would react, but one thing was certain. His life was about to change forever, all because of a message that was never meant for him. Just before 2 o'clock in the morning, a knock echoed against the worn wooden door of Emily's small room in Queens. She jolted awake to Ethan's cries. Then came a man's voice from the hallway, low, steady, yet strangely kind. Her breath caught. Someone had answered her desperate plea. "I'm sorry to bother you. I received your message tonight. I brought some things to help." Emily froze. The message. Her heart seemed to stop. In an instant, 1,000 thoughts flashed through her mind. Someone had read her desperate plea, and now that very person was standing outside her door. Fear and hope collided within her as her trembling hands unlatched the chain, opening the door just a crack. Before her stood a tall man with neatly kept brown hair, dressed in a simple white shirt and jeans. In his arms, large pharmacy bags filled with formula, diapers, wipes, and basic medicine. His green eyes carried a warmth and sincerity, with no trace of pity or ulterior motive. "Who are you?" Emily asked, her voice hoarse. "Daniel," he replied with a gentle smile. "I got your message asking for help. Maybe it wasn't meant for me, but I don't think that matters. What matters is that your baby needs to eat." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. Never before had a stranger appeared at such a crucial moment, yet at the same time, shame washed over her. Her tiny cluttered room, the sagging bed, the cracked walls, all laid bare before a man she instantly knew belonged to a different world. Daniel stepped inside, sat on the rickety chair, and carefully opened a new can of formula. His movements were steady, practiced, as though he had done this before. He shook the bottle, tested the temperature on his wrist, and handed it to Emily. "There you go. Ethan's going to like this," Daniel said softly. Emily held her son close, guiding the bottle to his trembling lips. Ethan latched on immediately, drinking greedily. The cries faded into quiet gulps, filling the silence of the room with the sweetest sound Emily had heard in days. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she watched her baby finally find comfort after hours of hunger. "Why? Why would you do this?" she whispered, her voice breaking between gratitude and suspicion. Daniel met her gaze, calm and unwavering. "Because when a mother asks for milk for her child, there's no need for questions. This isn't charity, it's humanity." In that moment, the room seemed to glow with a new light. This stranger, a man she had never known, was sitting there ensuring her baby would not go hungry. Gratitude swelled in her chest, but so did the sting of pride. "I'll pay you back," she blurted quickly, clutching Ethan tighter. "It might take time, but I'll return every dollar." Daniel smiled and shook his head. "There's nothing to pay back. I didn't come here to loan you something. I came to make sure a child didn't go hungry tonight." And in that fragile silence, inside the dimly lit room, something unnamed began to take root. Emily didn't yet know whether to trust him fully or hold back, but deep down she understood one thing. Tonight had changed everything. In the days following that first encounter, Emily Johnson still could not believe what had happened. She looked at the neatly stacked cans of formula on the shelf, the diapers and wipes Daniel had brought, and it all felt like a dream. He hadn't just appeared and vanished like a passing wind. Instead, he remained present, but in a way that left Emily both unsettled and safe. Daniel didn't call constantly or flood her with texts. Instead, every so often after work, Emily would find a brown paper bag neatly placed outside her door. Inside were more formula, vitamins, or small baby items. Each bag came with a handwritten note. No need to reply, just wishing for Ethan's health. Emily read those words over and over, moved yet doubtful. All her life, she had believed no one gave without expecting something in return. But Daniel seemed different. He left gifts quietly and walked away, never demanding, never pressuring. Little by little, the wall of suspicion in her heart began to crumble. One afternoon, Emily took Ethan to a small neighborhood park for fresh air. As she sat on a bench, she saw Daniel walking toward her from a distance, a coffee in his hand and a soft smile on his face. He sat on the bench across from her, keeping enough space not to intrude. "How's Ethan doing?" he asked. "Much better," Emily replied, avoiding his eyes, though she couldn't deny the warmth his concern stirred inside her. Those short conversations in the park gradually became a routine. Daniel shared stories of his childhood in a modest home, about the father who left and the mother who raised him alone. Each word carried the weight of old pain, yet also glowed with pride for his late mother. Emily listened and realized that behind his polished exterior was a man carrying scars of his own. For the first time, she saw something they shared. Both of them knew what it meant to lose, to carry burdens alone. Trust deepened in a way Emily never expected on a frantic morning when Ethan spiked a high fever. His face flushed, his tiny body trembling. Emily clutched him in her arms, tears falling as she panicked. In desperation, she dialed Daniel's number. He answered on the first ring. "Ethan has a fever. I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "Stay calm. I'm on my way. I'll have my doctor ready for you." Daniel's voice was firm, steady, without hesitation. Less than 30 minutes later, he was at her door, driving his familiar pickup truck. On the way to his private clinic, Daniel handled the wheel with a calmness that soothed her frayed nerves. At the clinic, his trusted physician, an older man with a warm demeanor, examined Ethan carefully. "It's just a mild viral infection, nothing serious. We'll prescribe medicine and monitor closely. He'll be fine soon," the doctor assured. Relief washed over Emily, followed quickly by dread about the cost. She opened her mouth to ask, but Daniel gently interrupted. "Don't worry about that. It's taken care of." There was no boasting, no condescension, nothing that made her feel indebted. He said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That subtle grace brought tears to Emily's eyes. On the drive back, Emily cradled Ethan sleeping peacefully in her arms while Daniel drove in silence. In that quiet, something shifted. Emily realized that, for the first time in a long while, she trusted a man. Not because of gifts, not because of financial help, but because of the way he showed up. Steady, genuine, and exactly when she needed it most. That night, after laying Ethan down in his crib, Emily sat awake for hours. Her heart whispered what her mind still tried to deny. Maybe the man who appeared because of a wrong number wasn't random at all. Maybe he was the gift destiny had been saving for her and for her son. In the weeks after Ethan's fever, Emily Johnson's life began to take on a new rhythm. Not all her burdens had vanished, but Daniel Walker's steady presence had changed everything. He often stopped by the park in the late afternoons, where Emily took Ethan for fresh air. At first, she kept her distance, speaking only briefly. But gradually, those meetings became a quiet anticipation for both of them. Daniel had a special way of making Ethan laugh. He mimicked animal sounds, made silly noises, and every time the baby's innocent face lit up, tiny hands waving excitedly. Emily sat nearby, watching her son's delight in the arms of this stranger, and she felt her heart sink in a way she couldn't explain. During those conversations in the park, Daniel slowly opened up more. He spoke about his early days building his career from scratch, about sleepless nights hunched over blueprints, about the fear of failure that never left him. Emily listened, surprised to realize that behind the successful businessman was a man as vulnerable as anyone else. One afternoon, with Ethan asleep in his stroller, Daniel said quietly, "You know, I used to think I had everything, but every time I went back to that empty apartment, I realized nothing truly belonged to me. Meeting you and Ethan, I started to understand what I'd been missing all along." Emily stayed silent, her heart pounding. His words echoed inside her because she too carried the same feeling. Since Daniel appeared, the lonely nights had grown warmer, and the hope she thought was gone had begun to flicker again. Still, Emily wrestled with herself. Fear lingered, the fear of being used, of being abandoned, just as Ethan's father had left, without a word. Every time Daniel drew near, her heart trembled with trust, but her mind warned her to hold back. Then one Sunday, Daniel invited Emily and Ethan to Central Park. They sat on the grass, Ethan crawling around, his laughter ringing into the open air. Daniel sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the baby, with a tenderness that words could not describe. "Emily," he said, his voice low but steady, "all my life I've been searching for an answer to the emptiness in my heart. And this morning, watching you and Ethan, I realized the answer has been right in front of me. I don't lack success. I lack a family." Emily's throat tightened. Tears welled as she realized his confession mirrored her own hidden truth. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "So do I. I've been afraid. I've doubted. But day by day I realized I've fallen in love with you without even knowing it." In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Daniel moved closer, slowly, giving her the chance to pull away. But Emily didn't. They looked into each other's eyes, where trust and affection had already taken root. And when their lips finally met, it was more than a kiss. It was a silent promise that both hearts had found their home. Beside them, Ethan giggled as if sensing the miracle unfolding. Amid the bustling heart of New York, a love story quietly bloomed, born from what once seemed like nothing more than a wrong number. After that afternoon in Central Park, when feelings were finally confessed, everything between Emily and Daniel shifted. The awkward silences were gone, the cautious glances disappeared. Each meeting carried a new closeness, as if two souls had finally found each other after years of wandering. Daniel began to appear more often, though always respectful of Emily's space. He never showed up unannounced. Every visit was planned, and he usually brought small gifts for Ethan, a picture book, a new outfit, or even just a rubber ball. Emily grew accustomed to his presence, realizing her tiny apartment in Queens no longer felt as dark as before. One crisp September morning, Daniel took Emily and Ethan to a small garden on the outskirts of the city. It was a hidden place, quiet, filled with golden chrysanthemums blooming in the warm sunlight. Ethan giggled as he crawled on the grass, while Emily marveled at the tenderness in Daniel's gaze as he watched them. "You know," Daniel said, his eyes glistening, "since the day I met you, I've been thinking about the future more than ever. Before, my plans revolved only around work, but now I think of a family, a real home." Emily froze, her hands tightening around the scarf on her shoulders. Her heart pounded, torn between joy and fear. Deep down, she had dreamed of a complete family for Ethan, but the gap between them, a wealthy businessman and a struggling single mother, still made her hesitate. Daniel seemed to sense her conflict. He gently held her hand and said softly, "I'm not here to change you. I just want to build a future with you, where Ethan grows up surrounded by love. Please, let me be part of this family." Before she could reply, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a simple yet elegant ring, the metal glinting under the afternoon sun. "Emily Johnson," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you give me the honor of becoming Ethan's father?" The air seemed to stand still. Ethan looked up, clapping his tiny hands as if cheering. Tears flooded Emily's eyes as she covered her mouth with trembling hands. Memories rushed back, the sleepless nights, the tears of despair, the moment she had sent that desperate message in the dark. And now, before her, stood a promise of family, of love she once believed existed only in dreams. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I will." Daniel laughed through his tears, slipped the ring onto her finger, and embraced both mother and son in his arms. The meadow became the witness to a new beginning, a beginning born from what seemed like the smallest mistake. From that day forward, Emily and Ethan's lives turned a new page. Daniel brought them to a house he had been quietly preparing in the suburbs of New York, a home with a wide yard, a wooden swing, and a little room painted soft blue, just for Ethan. Emily stood frozen at the doorway, tears streaming as she realized this was the dream she had never dared to imagine. In the days that followed, they began planning their wedding. Daniel wanted it to be simple but warm, with only their closest loved ones. Emily worried about fitting into his world, but Daniel always reassured her, "I don't love you because of where you belong. I love you because of who you are." The wedding day came in a small chapel, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, bathing the space in golden hues. Emily, in a modest white dress, walked slowly down the aisle with Ethan in his tiny suit, toward Daniel, who stood waiting with eyes overflowing with love. When the pastor asked, Daniel held Emily's hands tightly and declared, "I vow to love and protect you and Ethan in days of abundance and in days of struggle. I vow to always remember that this love began with a mistake, but it is the most beautiful miracle of my life." Emily wept as she replied, "I vow to trust your love even when fear tries to cloud my heart. I vow to build with you a family where Ethan and our future children grow up believing that miracles are real." Their kiss after the vows filled the chapel with applause. Ethan clapped and squealed, as if he understood that from this moment on, his little family was whole. From a wrong number sent in the dark of night, Daniel, Emily, and Ethan had written a new beginning, a beginning built on trust, love, and the courage to reach for happiness. After the warm wedding in the small chapel, Emily Johnson officially became Daniel Walker's wife, and Ethan finally had a true father. In the days that followed, their lives entered a new chapter, the chapter of a complete family. The suburban house quickly turned into a real home. In the mornings, Daniel woke up early to prepare coffee for Emily, while she busied herself with a simple breakfast. Ethan babbled in his high chair, bright eyes watching his parents as if he already understood their family was now whole. On weekend afternoons, they strolled through the wide garden together. Daniel had built a wooden swing under an old maple tree, where Ethan loved to sit for hours. Emily often sat on the porch watching the two men in her life play, her heart overflowing with peace. Daniel's love for Ethan went far beyond material care. He spent time reading bedtime stories, guiding his first wobbly steps, patiently listening to every babble. To Ethan, he wasn't a stepfather, but simply Dad, the man who was always there, always loving. For Emily, the biggest change wasn't material comfort, but the sense of security. She no longer stayed up late worrying about formula money, no longer trembled when Ethan fell ill. Now, beside her, was a man who knew how to shoulder burdens, to share, and most importantly, to love unconditionally. A year after the wedding, their little family welcomed another member, a baby girl named Grace. Her arrival doubled the joy in their home. Emily grew busier but happier than ever. Daniel adored holding his daughter, and whenever Grace slept in his arms, his eyes glowed with a quiet, complete happiness. Ethan, now 2.5, ran around the garden, calling Daddy into the open air. He embraced his baby sister with innocent tenderness, filling the house with the sound of children's laughter. Many times, Emily wiped away tears as she realized, from a desperate wrong text, she now had the family she had always dreamed of. One evening, after both children were asleep, Emily sat on the sofa beside Daniel. Resting her head on his shoulder, she whispered, "I once thought my life had ended when I faced motherhood alone. But because of one small mistake, everything started over. You are the miracle for me and Ethan." Daniel squeezed her hand, smiling. "No, it was you and Ethan who were the miracle for me. I once had everything, but I lacked a family. Now I have you, I have our children, and I lack nothing." Outside, New York glittered restlessly. But inside, 3 hearts beat as one. From a wrong message came the right beginning, a family complete at last. Perhaps that's the lesson we can all take with us. Never underestimate the power of compassion. You never know when one small act of kindness can turn into the greatest story of someone's life, or even your own. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many more lives we can touch together. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who needs a little hope today. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when a wrong turn led to something unexpectedly beautiful? Share your story in the comments below. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for believing in the power of love and second chances. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never forget, the smallest mistake might just be the beginning of your greatest miracle.